Today, I want to talk about some of my favorite animated scenes, ones I saw at a relatively young age that left such a big impression on me, it opened my mind to what the visual arts are capable of. Animation is such an amazing medium where anything is possible. Things that you can only dream of can be manifested into a real, tangible, moving form. It can speak to the subconscious and defy all logic. There's plenty of great animated films that are awe-inspiring all the way through, like Akira, for example. I mean, we could talk about animated films for hours, but what I want to talk about specifically are the animated scenes that stick out from the rest of the movie for whatever reason. But first, a word from this video's sponsor. Remember the Oregon Trail? It's a game I have fond memories of playing as a kid. For one thing, it was one of the only games where you were allowed to play it at school, for educational purposes, of course. But then you'd go home and spend most of your night playing it too, inching closer and closer to Oregon every playthrough. It was addicting. You just had to get to the end. Well, I'm happy to say that we'll be able to relive those days because a brand new modern successor to the Oregon Trail is here. Experience the Oregon Trail like never before, available November 14th for Nintendo Switch and PC. Gather your traveling party and fill your wagon with supplies for the ultimate journey across the United States fraught with danger. Survive blizzards, broken limbs, starvation, and yes, everyone's favorite, dysentery, as you navigate your way through America's untamed frontier. On the trail, you'll hunt for food, ford rivers, and repair your wagon as you try to stay alive in the frontier. You'll have to make the tough decisions that determine who makes it to Oregon before winter and who doesn't. Pick up your copy of the Oregon Trail now by clicking the link in my description below. So I'm going to pick out 5 of my favorite animated scenes. This doesn't necessarily mean it's my top 5, and it's just 5 that come to mind that have stuck with me for a long time. We could always talk about more later, and be sure to leave some comments on what are your favorite animated scenes. But let me explain just a bit more. The scenes I'm picking out all come from a more traditional era of hand-drawn animation, without or with very little computer aid. The movie itself doesn't have to be great, but it can be. Even the quality of the animation doesn't necessarily have to be that well crafted. It's more about how it sticks out from the rest of the film, what makes it memorable. It could even be from a live action film like Kill Bill. The flashback sequences go into an anime style which differs drastically from the rest of the movie. And sometimes live action movies use an animated scene as a joke or a dream scene or a psychedelic hallucination. It doesn't have to be as stylistically different as that, but it needs to grab your attention in some way. Fantasia is a movie made up of different animated segments that are all unique and memorable in their own way. Mickey Mouse, dinosaurs, and the devil. I especially like that devil scene. That's got to go on my Halloween video playlist every year. Dumbo is another great example with that really weird elephant parade scene. But I already talked about that one recently in my top 5 Disney films. One of the first animated films I ever saw that was intended for adults was Heavy Metal, based on the comics magazine and set to the music of Black Sabbath, Blue Oyster Cult, Sammy Hagar, Cheap Trick, and more. It's a group of isolated segments that are loosely connected, all animated by different production houses, but I can't pick just one scene. So let's get down to it. Here's 5 animated scenes that stick out to me. Number 5, Transformers, the '86 movie. I've definitely talked about it before, but it's been a while. It can't be underestimated what a big movie experience this was for me as a kid when I saw it in the theater. The Autobots and Decepticons just finished off a major battle. Megatron and company are now damaged, floating out into space, when they come to meet the giant planet eater Unicron, who makes a deal with them to revitalize Megatron, turning him into Galvatron and upgrading his entire crew, making them all into new characters and selling a new line of toys. All those glowing rays of light and grid lines are still awesome to look at. I don't even know exactly how it's done, but check that out. It's beyond rad, and with Vince DiCola's badass score running through it, the whole effect is hypnotic. Number 4, Beavis and Butthead Do America. Anyone who's watched the show knows that Beavis and Butthead isn't exactly the greatest example of quality animation. It's done in a very crude way, which perfectly fits with the lowbrow, immature nature of its main characters. In fact, I recall a time when my mom sent me to some Saturday animation courses while I was a young teen, and my instructor was talking about how the number of cells per second of animation can vary. The more frames, the smoother and better the animation is. And when the amount of frames is low, he called that the Beavis and Butthead style. And that's what makes this scene in the movie so surprising. It hits you out of nowhere. Beavis and Butthead are crawling through the desert, dehydrated, and then all of a sudden they start hallucinating. Everything becomes discolored, Butthead's face starts to twist and swirl, and you can tell things are only starting up and it's going to get crazier. And then these little Buttheads start climbing out of his melting face. And then the riff comes in and there's this green demon with a guitar and leather jacket rocking out. And then there's so many little creatures on the screen, you don't even have time to look at it all. What helps sell it is Beavis's reaction. He's rubbing his eyes with that goofy grin, kind of like he's confused by what he's seeing, but he also thinks it's cool. It's as if the character is feeling the same way as us, like, oh man, this is great. Next thing, he's going down a spiral inside a TV on a pile of skulls. Flames are shooting up everywhere. And then there's the torch dancing creature with eyeballs falling out. And it just gets crazier and crazier. I really like the transitions and how everything morphs and takes shape. And it builds up to this big shot where there's this big leg. And over here, there's some monster with its tongue out. And there's so many things cluttered into the frame. It's like some kind of Salvador Dali painting. The music is by White Zombie, which fits perfectly, and so does the art style. It looks just like it came out of one of those CD booklets, like Astro Creep. Rob Zombie's always been connected with this scene, and from what I gathered, Mike Judge asked him to come up with ideas, and he drew sketches for it, and the sequence was directed by Chris Prynowski. Well, it was a damn good job. Number 3, Jetsons The Movie. Yeah, I grew up watching all those Hanna-Barbera cartoons like Jetsons, Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, all that. Even though they initially aired in the 60s, they played reruns a lot in the 80s, and to me they just felt like fresh, new, original shows. So when Jetsons the Movie came out, I saw in the theater, not knowing that it was a big reunion, bringing back many of the original voice actors. Sadly, 2 of the actors died during production, George O'Hanlon as George Jetson and Mel Blanc as Mr. Spacely. In addition, Dawes Butler, the voice of Elroy, died before they started, so I didn't know it as a kid, but I was witnessing the end of an era. But the scene that sticks out is a musical glam rock style scene performed by Tiffany, who also did the voice of Judy Jetson, replacing the original Janet Waldo for reasons I don't know. But anyway, check out this scene. So Judy has this fantasy about this rock star, which takes her on this psychedelic journey involving meteors, dancing constellations, a world of giant colorful mushrooms. Next thing, she's riding a unicorn. The style of animation keeps changing. One part, there's this weird abstract painted style of a guy playing guitar, and then there's all these paint splash transitions, and then it goes into a comic book style. And next, the characters are made of solid shapes. And then it does all kinds of crazy stuff. There's lots of three-dimensional perspectives, zooming, morphing, transitioning. Faces keep emerging with many different interpretations of the guitar playing figure. There's cupids and moons and flashing glowing lines and shapes. I mean, just look at it. This is 80s MTV music video on crack. And that song is so catchy. I mean, I don't know what it is, but this scene always puts me in a good mood. Number 2, Halloween is Grinch Night. The Grinch's Halloween outing is nowhere near up to the level of quality as its more famous Christmas predecessor. The budget looks a little smaller, the animation's a bit cheaper, but that only makes it edgier and weirder. It's set before the Grinch's heart grows on Christmas. Here he's back to the way you remember him as an evil villain. The people of Whoville live in fear of the Grinch, especially on Halloween night. So they all lock themselves indoors, except for a brave little Who named Euchariah, who steps outside only to get swept away in a windstorm. He runs into the Grinch, who he's not afraid of, and decides to distract the Grinch before he can make his way down the Whoville. So the Grinch puts him to the ultimate scare test. He opens a little wooden door on the floor, and this is when all hell breaks loose. First, he's greeted by a blobby green face with flashing red eyes. Next, he's plunged into a world with all kinds of weird creatures that could only be conjured up in the world of Dr. Seuss. The whole scene has some kind of childhood look to it where the things you see are so simply rendered and don't look like much thought or precision was done for it, but something about that makes it so much creepier. These white ghostly figures with beak-like snouts are so oddly disturbing. And then there's that weird green skinny thing with the long legs. It's the absence of any detailed features that make it so unsettling. It's also scary just the way Euchariah has to avoid them all as they enter from different parts of the frames. I mean, either flying in from somewhere or they come stomping by and he's dodging every which way. I really like that thing that's made up of nothing but legs. It just rotates, chasing him like a wheel. And there's never a clear sense of space. He falls down a trap door, goes down a slide, and the whole thing is like a funhouse. The colors of all the creatures stick out by keeping the background black most of the time. Sometimes they use the shape of an object to only hint at a humanoid figure. Like there's this shot where there's a spider or something hanging in the middle, and it becomes like the eyes of the whole shape around it. And even though it uses a lot of neat transitions, they also knew when to use straight cuts, which makes it more shocking, especially all those weird painted eyes that flash before the screen. There's even this one part where there's this yellow bird that opens its wings and silently screams, and you only see it for a second, if that. But the shot that always bothered me as a kid was that weird silhouette figure who's sort of bird-like, but with arms and legs. He's standing there in this like gunslinger pose, which kind of looks like they're trying to imitate a showdown in a Western movie. And it builds anticipation like there's going to be some kind of confrontation, but nothing happens. They just cut away. So you'll never find out what that thing can do. You don't even have a chance to see it move. It's just standing there, frozen. And something about that is so damn creepy. So watching this as a kid made me feel the same way as Euchariah, who is putting his fears to the test. Number 1, The Wall. This is the only live-action movie on my list, so if you're not familiar, it's the visual interpretation of Pink Floyd's big double concept album, The Wall, using the album as the main soundtrack to the film, with very little dialogue. When it comes to the music itself, I'm more of a fan of Dark Side of the Moon, but nevertheless, The Wall is a masterpiece. The movie of The Wall definitely has some mixed results, but the animated scenes are some of the trippiest and most well-executed of the time, or hell, maybe all time. The movie isn't told in a conventional narrative way, but it depicts a rock star who's detached from reality, putting up a metaphorical wall between himself and the outside world. In real life, the band has been kind of haunted by the memory of original member Syd Barrett, who became out of touch with reality himself. So whenever there's an animated scene in the movie, it feels natural as a look inside this character's drug-ridden mind. Everything that appears feels like it exists as some sort of symbol or something that's important to the story. It was directed by Alan Parker with design and animation by their longtime illustrator, Gerald Scarfe. One animated scene is a ghastly depiction of war and death set to the song Goodbye Blue Sky. We see fighter planes turn into grave-like crosses, skeletal soldiers withering away, people with hammer-shaped gas masks, a giant bird fading into steel rubble, and a blood-dripping cross. And then there's empty spaces that begins with the famous fucking flowers, and then there's the iconic screaming face that comes out of the wall. And then we see too many weird images to even relay or count as it perfects the art of the dreamlike morphing. You can't forget the marching hammers and that final scene at the trial with those extremely bizarre characters. With a number of animated scenes, it's impossible to pick just one, but I can't emphasize how imaginative and demented it all is. So there you go. There's just a handful of scenes I picked out. So let me know, what are your favorite crazy animated scenes?